Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello, welcome to the lecture 31. In this lecture we are going to start a very important part of the housing planning, which is the planning for the informal housing categories. In the last lecture we have discussed about the service department and the working persons hostel. In the last few lectures we covered the formal housing category, which can be created in the new housing areas beyond the city core, and as a part of that we discussed cooperative housing, we discussed employees housing, rental housing, and as in the last lecture the service apartment and the working persons hostel. So all these housing categories are formal, and formal in the sense that it has some formal transaction which is either registered at the under the state law, or it is made on the formal land and formal building permissions are taken. But there are examples or there are instances where informal housing typologies are there in our cities, where we do not find that the land tenure and the formal permission for the building are not taken, and for those reason the informal housing typologies, sometimes those are unauthorized, sometimes those are illegal, and sometimes those are effect of some social problem. So all these kind of housing typologies are there in our cities, which we call as a informal housing. Now why we should study informal housing in greater importance? The simple reason is, in our cities more than 30% on an average of the total population lives in the informal houses category. So this is very, very important, and this housing typology provides the essential service to the city. The service population, like the domestic help, like the people who are working at the rickshaw puller or e-rickshaw puller, or those who are working at the informal shops in the cities, those are coming from the informal settlements, informal housing. So we need to study their condition, their issues, problem, and how we can strategize to provide better housing, to provide a better accommodation to these people. So due to this importance we have to study in greater details. So today we will cover its various typologies, its various dimension of the informality, based on the dimension how we can differentiate the typology, and how we can have a broad take a broad strategy for each typology. And the next lecture we will discuss the specific slum improvement programs and models applicable for Indian situation. So now let us see what are the basic characteristics of the informal housing. We told that housing is essentially a creation which is done on over the land. So informal houses basically developed on encroached land. This encroached land can be government land, it can be some industry land, it can be some private land as well, but definitely the people who are living there, those are not encroached, not owned by them, it is encroached land. In some cases, even if the owners or the end users have the land ownership, but they are not having the legal construction, they have the unauthorized construction, and that also leads to unauthorized or informal housing category as well. So informal houses can be illegal land, illegal building, legal land, illegal building, and illegal land and illegal building, or encroachment in any company's land or any government land as well. So these are the basic characteristics of the informal housing. The next very important characteristics are there are no formal transaction with the government authority in terms of their property transaction or in terms of their land transaction concern. So that makes its informality in true sense. Since this type of developments are created or emerge as a part of organic development of the people, people come there one by one as per their necessity as migrants mainly, and they encroach on other lands, and as a result of that, slowly because of their unhygienic condition, because of their inferior socio-economic and socio-cultural condition, there is a community which develops over the period of time. So unlike the other formal housing, here we do not find that the community development is a challenge. So here the community is there for the informal houses. The fundamental difference between the informal house and the formal house which we identify is the inferior quality of the basic services. Basic services includes fundamental services like water supply, sanitation, waste disposal and the accessibility. Whereas in the formal house we have seen that we provide all these infrastructures and services and develop land before the people come, but here the people comes before the services are made and before the services are given to the particular land, because the land is, most of the cases land is encroached and land is not owned by the people. So basic difference between the formal and the informal house lacks in the basic services. Because of the basic degradation of the basic services and the informal nature of their land encroachment, we find that a very degraded layers of cultural and social level, the low literacy ratio and all kinds of social and cultural degradation is there. As a result, we find that it also creates a barrier to improve economically for this kind of people. So social, cultural and economic, from all respect, the informal housing, the people struggle to improve on their own life and struggle to get the basic facility and services. This another very important part is the livelihood, because if you find all the informal houses like slums, squatters, pavement dwellers, this kind of people basically survives on the government land, survives on the public land or the encroached land, and because of that, a simple reason for this is that they are basically encroaching the land because that particular land could be very near to their job location, very near to their livelihood location. They might be informal worker in some factory, in some railway station or in some road junction. So because of their and their job location is such that, and job nature is such that they have to be there in the early morning and till the late night. So that's why they need essentially a very near location from their job location for their house. As a result, they end up in encroaching other lands, so they cannot commute a long distance from the city periphery. So it is the essential reason that because of the livelihood and the nature of livelihood which makes them encroaching in the public land. Now, what are the informal housing typology that should be discussed before we go to the further dimensions of the informality and its dynamics. So, there are various kinds of informal housing typologies based on various parameters. The first is the private self-help housing, which is basically plotted housing. We have seen that in the periphery of the city, basically in the peri-urban areas. The peri-urban areas are the urban areas which is situated beyond the city limit and sometimes in between the rural context. So in those peri-urban areas and in the periphery of the major cities, the people, even if they have the land tenure, the land ownership, they finally sometimes end up in unauthorized construction. They do not bother about the taking permission from the local panchayats or local municipalities. So as a result of that, this informality of this private self-help housing relates to their informal nature of the construction, but most of the cases they have the land ownership, they have their own land. Because of the political or the socio-economic events like say division of the country or the war or the similar kind of political events which creates or which makes an event or condition where thousands of people are forced to migrate from one state to another state or one country to another country. So this becomes a major reason for refugee settlements. We have seen that after the independence, like in 1948 and after the Bangladesh war in 1971, lot of refugees, they came from the Pakistan and Bangladesh to India in the state of Punjab and West Bengal, and those are the refugee settlements. In some of the cases, refugee settlements, the government allotted the land to the refugee settlements, but the house conditions are very poor, and because of this poor nature of the refugee settlements, it becomes a very essential subject under the informal category. And then you have seen the conventional slum population, which is termed as bastis in some cities including Calcutta, Chawls which is a popular name in Mumbai, Juggi Jhopri which is a popular local name in the city of Delhi, and those are basically classical slums which are living there for a long time in a large area, and those are on in the encroached land and having the poor condition of the living of in terms of the housing and the basic services. And in the informal housing typologies, the conventional or the classical slums, they are the major component within the informal housing typologies, like informal private self-help housing, refugee settlements and other typologies are there, but the classical slums, they hold almost more than 50% of the informal housing typologies. Then we have seen that after the industrial development in our country, in various states where the industrial colonies developed, like the jute lines along the river Hooghly in the state of West Bengal, and similarly several industries were developed, and as a result of the industrial development but lack of affordable houses, the people encroached the public land, especially land along the canals, land along the rivers or the railway lines, and those made the industrial colonies and jute lines. Those are also part of informal housing. The squatter settlements, other than the industrial development, the squatters settlements are those settlements which are visible along the networks, like say railway lines or the canals or the rivers, or along the similar kind of networks, like even highway roads. We can see the squatter settlements. These settlements are basically temporary in nature. They come for some time, squat there, stay there for some time, and maybe after some time they go to some other area. So the basic difference between the squatter settlement and the classical slum is that both are on encroached land, but the classical slums, they are staying there for a long time, whereas squatter settlements are there for a short duration of the time. Then we have pavement dwellers. Pavement dwellers are basically the individual person or the fragmented family who have nowhere to go and who are mobile in the city, who are not static. Their job location is basically begging or maybe informal shops. Informal hawking is the one more option the pavement dwellers have, and they basically survive on the public land, like the railway terminals, bus terminals, or the major public areas like below the flyovers or similar structure. So pavement dwellers is very important, like they are the poorest of the poor. They don't have the minimum the financial strength even to make a minimum housing, whereas we have seen in the slums and the Joggi Jhopri and all the other kinds of settlement, at least people have something to make a temporary structure, but in the pavement dwellers they don't have anything except just to take the public land and sleep for the night. Other than that, we have seen that in city, within the city areas, when the city grows, within the city we have found that various settlements are there, where maybe the owners, they own the land but the buildings are unauthorized. Maybe the FAR or FSI permitted in that area is 1 or 1.5, but because of the higher land value and higher revenue generation possibility through the rental or the sale of the housing units, they have gone up to 2 or 2.5 or 3 FAR. So because of that, those colonies are basically unauthorized colonies. These unauthorized colonies are different than the other informal settlements. In the other informal settlements, people are by and large encroaching in the other lands, but unauthorized colonies can be in the own land, but the constructions are basically unauthorized. And often it is, I mean, it is a very basically pakka structure, more than 2 or 3 or 4 floors also can be seen in the bigger cities. And then we find urban villages. Urban villages we mentioned in the initial lectures that urban villages are nothing. It is the transformation or transformed form of a village. When a village is surrounded by the city growth, a city grows over the period of time, and during the growth of a city, when a city surrounds a village, and the characteristics of the village in terms of livelihood from the primary sector to the secondary and tertiary sector, it is transformed to the secondary and tertiary sector. It gets a kind of a very peculiar situation within the surrounding urban setting. So so transforming from the village to the urban areas, it lacks the basic services and it is transforming to the different kind of livelihood options. So those kind of urban villages are there. In urban villages, basically your land is owned by the people, but there is no development control or very lack of development control enforcement, and because of the lack of enforcement, people often end up in making unauthorized colonies. Then it is also important to see the dimensions of the informality, that what are the fundamental dimensions by which we can segregate or we can classify the different kind of informal settlements. So first thing what we discussed is the ownership of land or the tenure. Basically the land ownership, it can be 3 types. Either it can be fully owned, that is the freehold, it can be leasehold, or it can not be, may not be owned. So or that means the encroached land. The legal ownership of the building, even if the land is owned by the people or the end user, they may not have the legal ownership of the building because they might have taken a rent in a unauthorized construction or unauthorized building. So that is the second dimension. Duration of encroachment, the encroachment which is for longer duration, and a settlement is a permanent settlement, those are called as a slum population, but we find that there are squatter settlements where people encroach the public land for a smaller period of time. For example, you might have seen the encroachment in the river banks. In the river banks, the people can stay there throughout the year except the rainy season when there could be a flood situation. So except those period of time, they can stay there and they encroach on their land, they develop their vegetables, and because of their agricultural activity, they earn their livelihood. And similarly in the similar squatter settlements are there in the network line. So those kind of encroachment are not for the longer duration, mainly during the some period of months over in a particular year. Then level of services and infrastructure, most of the informal settlements lacks the basic services and infrastructure, except few where you will find that the quality of the service and quality of the infrastructure may be good because of their high paying capacity, but the overall structure and the development is illegal. That is also possible in bigger cities. Livelihood, most of the cases the livelihoods are secondary and tertiary, but in some cases like the cases of urban village, the livelihood could be primary also, but the primary sector of the activities like agriculture and fishery are in the position of transformation. They are transforming towards the secondary and the tertiary sector. Static or mobile, except the pavement dwellers and the squatter settlements, most of the people in the informal sector or the informal settlement, they make their encroached houses as a static unit, but for the pavement dwellers and for the squatter settlements, they often move to some other places for their survival. It can be family. the informal housing could be accommodating family or maybe single. Most of the cases, in the cases like pavement dwellers and squatters, we find that it is a single person. Then whether it is a formalized as per law or not, that is another very important dimensions of the informality. Then quality of structure, in most of the cases the quality of structures are very poor, and it is termed as a kacha structure. Kacha structure is nothing but the temporary structures which is unable to provide the complete protection against the weather effect and weather the natural hazards. So those kind of structure, including the kacha structure in the walls, kacha structure in the roof, those kind of structures are there. But except few cases like say unauthorized colonies where the land is owned by the people, but the building are done in an unauthorized manner, where you will find that the structures could be in good quality also, but they lack the legal the formal transaction as per the law. Now based on this discussion, let us see that how the dimensions vary as per the categories. Now so let us write the dimensions. One is land ownership, then building or construction, then we have duration, then we have livelihood, then we have discussed this also, family or single, then structure, so these are the dimensions of the informality. Now we can see that what are the typologies we have to analyze the dimensions. The first typology we discussed is the basically, let us start with the slums, classical slums. Then squatters, then we can write industrial colonies or jute line, then we can write pavement dwellers. We can have the typologies like urban villages, then we have other than urban village, other unauthorized colonies, and also we have few more typologies. Let us see if we have missed any typology or not. So basically, so So, self-help plotted housing and refugee settlements, these are the broad typologies we discussed. Now, let us see how the dimensions of the informality vary as per the different typology. Now, you can see that land ownership for the slums, usually they do not have the land ownership, even for the squatters they do not have. So, all the categories except this could be both, they could have the land ownership. The urban villages basically they have the land ownership, the unauthorized colonies most of the cases they have, in self-help housing they have the land ownership. In some cases the unauthorized colonies could have or they may not have the land ownership. Now, let us see the building construction. Yes, the building, if the land is not owned by the people, there is no point of the formal permission or formal transaction of the for the building construction. So, all these are informal in nature. This can be both. Right. If we consider duration, like duration, we are dividing the duration as a permanent or temporary. The slums are by and large they are permanent dwellers, they are the permanent, we are writing P for the permanent. So, squatters they are basically temporary, and for industrial colonies, yes, they are permanent settlement. Pavement dweller they are temporary, they are basically mobile, they move from one place to another place. Urban village, yes, they are permanent settlement. For the service and infrastructure, for all the typologies the quality is very bad. So, very poor condition. Except the unauthorized colonies and self-help housing, most of the typologies they have the very poor condition. Then livelihood, yes, livelihood for the slums and squatter, those are except the pavement dwellers which is basically mobile in nature, and the squatter settlement mobile in nature, and for urban village where they have the mix of primary plus secondary and plus tertiary. So, all can be possible for the urban village, whereas for all typologies the predominant livelihood is non-agricultural. Right. So, you can understand the how they differ in the livelihood. Now, in the static and mobile we already mentioned that except the squatters and the pavement dwellers, all are basically static. They are static in nature until there is a heavy eviction drive, they do not move from one place to another place. And similarly, except the pavement dwellers and squatters, most of the people they have the family. Family structure. The pavement dwellers have this mostly they are single person, and for the squatters, they may have family and single person, both can be possible. Then the formalization as per the law, the slums are there are mixes, some of the slums are formalized as per law. So it is possible that there are mixed quantity of these slums. Squatters are never formalized because most of the cases squatters are developed on the untenable or very hazardous land. Industrial colonies, there are mixed examples of the formalization. Pavement dweller, there is no question arises for the formalization. Some of the urban villages are basically protected by the development control regulations, and some of them are given the legal status as well. In some of the example in the Delhi and the other cities, the government has regularized some of the unauthorized colonies on payment basis. So, but by and large it is not regularized. Similarly, for refugee settlement and self-help, it is a mixed kind of situation. Then the quality of structure is very poor for all the condition. So, if you find the structural condition or of the building, the self-help housing, the unauthorized colonies and urban villages, they are having mixed kind of building structures. Other than that, most of the informal housing, they have the poor, very poor quality. So, this is the so in this matrix we can understand the various typologies of the informal housing and how they vary with the different kind of dimensions of the of their informality. So, based on that, now let us see very quickly how we can do, what kind of interventions we can take to address this kind of informality in our cities. The first stage which we need to do is the essentially we have to make a comprehensive situation assessment, and see, when we talk about the situation assessment, it should include the physical, social and economic. Till JNNURM we did not have any approach in comprehensive situation assessment. What we did is that we just studied the slums case by case, but now what we do, we make a comprehensive assessment in terms of the whole city. So, within a city we have to study all the slums, whole slums and all city, the whole city approach. We can make the assessment of their physical element like structures, infrastructure, the social elements like the literacy rate, like their sex ratio, their dependency ratio, and also economic parameters like livelihood, occupation structure, everything as a city level. Then we can make some preventive and curative strategies. If we have understood this the matrix, we can take appropriate curative strategies based on various approach and model. This models and approach we will discuss next day, and also we can take some preventive strategies or intervention which will prevent future formation of slums. This part we discussed in the last lecture in the rental and the rental housing and the creation of the hostels. The objective of all those kind of rental housing is to prevent the future informal housing. Then we have to explore the land availability in a city. Making the land available is the most challenging task of a housing planner. So, as we discussed in the housing strategy discussion, the land demarcation in the city level need to be done. And based on their sources like private or public, it need to be clearly indicated that how the land to be assembled at the city level and how it can be allocated as per their requirement. And even in the existing city or the core city where we need to redevelop the housing, the slum population or the squatters for their resettlement, we have to identify even the smaller land pockets which is available at the city core by the government. That is also important. Then we have to make an participatory approach. Why? Because unlike the new housing development, here we have the community ready who are staying there for long time. So, we have to take them in our decision making process. Unless until we take them in our decision making process, no intervention will be applicable and will be successful. And we have seen thousands of examples where we have rehabilitated and resettled the slums and the informal housing of people, but they have not taken or they have abandoned all those projects. So, because of their non-participatory in nature of their decision making, and because of the nature of the decision making, where we have not considered their livelihood and other dimensions, because of all those reasons the projects were failed. So, that is that. So, it is important to take their participation in our planning stage also. So, livelihood, I told that we have to consider livelihood from the starting to the end if we want to make a successful planning strategy for the informal housing. And the concept of tenable and non-tenable land, the most of the cases in this example what we have discussed, like the squatters, the industrial colonies, then you will find some like urban villages and some refugee settlements. Those are lying on some of the areas which are basically hazardous areas, like say below the high tension line, in the flood prone land, or in the along the railway lines or along the canals, which is very much risk prone and hazard prone. So, if you want to take a policy to rehabilitate or to redevelop them as is where is, that means in that same place, it is not possible for those kind of settlements. So, those kind of settlements which are basically living in a hazardous land, which are not tenable for the further development, for those settlement we have to relocate in some other feasible, technically feasible and environmentally viable and tenable land. So, the determination of the lands of this slum land and the future land as a tenable and non-tenable, that has to be done at the planning level before we assign slums and squatters for their particular intervention. Then we can relocate the non-tenable lands, like those who are staying in the non-tenable lands, for them we can relocate them to some new sites or some nearby sites, and those who are staying in the tenable slums, we can redevelop or we can rehouse in the same site by rebuilding the whole project or rebuilding or some upgrading or improving some structure and infrastructure, both that is possible. So, those kind of approaches need to be taken based on the slum typologies. So, this part we will discuss in a greater details next lecture. So, this kind of interventions and the actions could be taken broadly at the planning level. So, once we make the housing strategy and allocate the land for formal, core city and the informal houses. So, for the informal housing we have to keep the land in the periphery as well and also in the core city based on the availability, and apart from the land we have to take so many other interventions to make the project successful. So, based on that, let us see some of the example just to take the glimpse. This is the picture of the largest slums in India, Dharavi. This is a glimpse of the unauthorized colonies. You can see that how the unauthorized colonies have developed over the period of time. It is not essential that every house condition is bad, but the house those are unauthorized because either those are developed on the encroached land or they are constructed without any legal permission. These are typical examples of the squatter settlement. You can see that how the squatter settlements have developed along the railway lines, like you can see the poor condition of the infrastructure and how risky and hazard prone is their living and living and their quality of life. So, this kind of settlements are termed as the non-tenable slums or non-tenable squatter settlement. This cannot be encouraged on the same site, this has to be relocated and resettled. So, with these pictures we have just shown you some example. Remaining examples you can see from various databases, reports and the website as well. So, next lecture we will discuss basically the approaches in the improving of slums and squatter. We will deal upon the first two or 3 typologies, and we will see then what are the planning approaches we can take for their further development. So, let us summarize. Today we have discussed the various typologies of the informal settlements, the dimensions. We have talked about the dimensions like land ownership, building construction, duration, that is the nature of the settlement, permanent or temporary, quality of the service, basic services, livelihood, whether it is a agricultural or non-agricultural kind of that, their lifestyle, whether they are static or mobile, whether they are living in the family or single, whether their status, the land or the building status are formalized as per law or not, and the quality of structure, which may be kacha, pakka or semi pakka, or poor or good. Based on these dimensions, we have mapped out the condition of the various typologies. So, based on this the comparative matrix of the various typologies, next class we will discuss on the approaches and the models in improving slums and squatter. So, thank you for today's lecture.